Yep, he's still asleep. Let's give him some space tonight. He needs the rest. Look through the Heartland Supernatural episodes, especially the old ones. If there's any about caves, even briefly mentioned, I want to hear about it. Something wants Denver to see a cave, and I want to know why. It might be what we need to find our next step. We need to investigate the radio show more. Denver's only a tiny piece of this. There must be others, and thankfully, MWR's compiled countless stories for us to peruse. Helpful. Weirdly helpful.
Welcome to the Beating Heartland, created by Denver Baughman. Episode 13, Heartland Supernatural 2.
Well, those led nowhere. Last one.
Welcome back, listeners, to another episode of MWR's Heartland Supernatural, your go-to place for all the spine-tingling stories from the heart of the Midwest. Today, we have another special one-statement episode. That's right, one of our listeners sent in a doozy. This is a long one, so buckle up. Today's episode is also unique because the person that experienced this is not the one who sent it in. More on that later. First, let's talk about today's sponsor. The wilderness of the Midwest can be at one moment beautiful, and the next, dangerous. It's difficult enough to go hiking above ground, through the woods and across rivers, but that danger only grows when we delve underground. I'm not a fan of caves myself. Squeezing my body through a crack I shouldn't be able to fit through, without confirmation I'll be able to get back out, does not sound like a good time. However, many people find comfort and exhilaration from the tight confines. I guess it's the fact that below our feet is a hidden world of passages and caverns, just waiting to be discovered. For example, Illinois, where this radio show is located, is home to about 300 caves. Minnesota has a few hundred, Wisconsin more than 400, similar to Ohio and Michigan. Indiana has around 1,000, while Missouri close to 8,000 caves. These numbers grow every year. Suffice it to say, the Midwest is saturated with an entire underground world that is just begging to be explored. It shouldn't surprise us then, when we hear stories like today's. In the dark, tight spaces, we should expect the strange and the horrific. Where better to discover something separated from our normal experiences? Within the stone, there lies history, and sometimes that history doesn't want to be found. Other times, it's waiting to be discovered. That's what happened to Frederick Bales, according to his great-grandson, that is. And that is where today's story begins. My name is Benjamin Bales. My great-grandfather was eccentric. I suppose that will happen to anyone born in the mid-1800s. 1844, to be exact. Not that I'm much different. I'm old, and to say that I've had a silver spoon to my lips since birth would be an understatement. A life of luxury has its many perks, but as I lay on my bed, nearing the end of my life, I can't help but look to the past and reminisce on all the years that vanished. This led me to delve into my great-grandfather's personal notes and journals. I wasn't aware of their existence throughout most of my life. It was one of my children that found them while exploring the family mansion. They were tucked away in a room that time had forgotten. The discovery was interesting, but I was too busy to examine them in depth, and my kids were too young to care. It wasn't until recently, With all the free time in the world, thanks to the sickness that's left me bedridden, that I've decided to read them. One evening, before I drifted off into another fitful slumber, I had the maid fetch them. At this point, they were in some attic, lost and forgotten. The contents quickly consumed most of my time. On the front of the first journal was a note. To understand. This was exactly what I wanted to know. What had led my great-grandfather to pursue his fortune? What had fueled his determination? What had made him him? He had come from nothing and became one of the most respected businessmen on the Mississippi River. That resolve led to the mansion where I now reside. 1844, a time completely separate from the age in which we live. How quickly things change. Not even 200 years have passed, and the world is barely recognizable. Just 20 years prior, the first photograph had been taken. Charles Darwin visited the Galapagos 10 years before. Steam-powered mechanisms dominate the industry. And then, in 1844, Frederick Bales was born and left on the doorstep of an orphanage in the heart of Nauvoo, Illinois. This bustling so-called utopia along the Mississippi River was founded by the Latter-day Saints. The city had been founded only a few years prior and quickly grew, surpassing Chicago. Later that year, after the assassination of Joseph Smith, the LDS, headed by Brigham Young, would lead a mass exodus out of the city in hopes of a utopia farther west. The city quickly lost prominence, and in his early years, Frederick escaped his orphanage and traveled north. It led him to Galena, Illinois. At the time, Galena and the rest of Joe Daviess County were the suppliers of over 80% of the country's lead supply. Also, thanks to the Mississippi River and the rise of steamboats, trade and commerce were booming. I'm writing this to explain Frederick's position in life. He was an orphan who ran away with no prospects, other than that he was determined to work hard in a country that was quickly changing around him. He fostered a love for the river and traveled along it, working on the riverboats. He became intimately familiar with the cities of St. Louis and St. Paul as the steamboats traveled to them for commerce. In these cities, he also became intimately familiar with the vice that had plagued his family: alcohol. When he was left at the orphanage, the only thing next to him was an opened bottle of spirits. No note, no name. The orphanage had named him Frederick. He had chosen the last name Bales when he escaped to Galena. Ultimately, his legacy was his to choose. The Civil War began in 1861, when Frederick was only 17. While many bled and died, he worked in the mines and on the river, knowing that the country would need industry to continue. Then, the year 1865 rolled around, famous in American history for the end of the Civil War. 1865 was especially prominent for Frederick, because his life would never be the same. That is where the story really begins. I had become so fascinated with reading his journals, honest depictions of someone grappling with the forces around him, trying to pull together some stability. In 1865, all of those plans fell apart. Over the past couple of years, Frederick had fallen in love with the wilderness. He would often take hikes into the woods, soaking in the sound of the birds and the smell of nature. He also loved caves. He once wrote in his journal, and I quote, "The sensation of being completely by oneself underneath the earth leaves one with an immense feeling of power. For too long has the earth and its forces controlled our existence. We are in control now. We command the earth. We mine, craft ships, and delve where nothing has before." Dramatic, But as I said, he was eccentric. And it was upon one of these outings into the wilderness where his life changed. Well, listeners, we can't stop there, can we? The clock says it's time for another word from our sponsors. Don't go away. We discover what happened to Frederick on this fateful cave expedition when we return. Well, okay then. Hopefully all the history doesn't bore the audience. No, it was a good choice, Felix. I'm just joking. It's really interesting. You know, it's been a while since I've been to Galena. It's sad. You know, it's not far at all. You know, Mom used to take me all the time on, like, weekend outings. I don't know why we stopped. Sorry, who said that? No, it's nothing. I just heard someone say, "Find me." No one said that? It's probably just some feedback on the headphones. No, Felix, I don't know if that's actually possible or not. Let's just continue, okay? Welcome back, listeners. We now continue the intriguing tale of Frederick Bales, told by his great-grandson, Benjamin. He felt the itching. That peculiar feeling that would crop up from time to time. An itching to go into the wilderness, to discover anything. He ensured that he had enough supplies and food, and that someone knew he was heading out. Not that anyone was close in his life at the time. So he just let a co-worker that he drank with know. Then he headed out into the woods, following the itch. For those who don't know, Galena is exceptionally hilly and covered in trees. An oddity for most of Illinois. It's a beautiful place, and now considered a quiet vacation spot by many. However, hiking can be extremely challenging, even for those who are trained. That never deterred Frederick. He lived for the challenge. He never really planned his route. He mostly set a direction and would see where it led him. As I said, he liked the feeling of power that conquering nature gave him. After several hours, he finally admitted that he was lost. This wasn't the first time. He wasn't worried. He knew all the tips and tricks. Still, you can't help but start contemplating your life when faced with endless trees. This part of the journal is filled with ruminations on his life. He was only in his early 20s, but wrote like a much older man. The mines and steamboats did that to a person. Then it came to him, the itching, stronger than he'd ever felt. Almost a voice in his head calling to him. It pushed him deeper into the woods. He followed. He found a cave when the sun was setting. Dark clouds were rolling in, and finding shelter was the prudent idea. Rain would soon arrive. The cave's mouth was rather large. The opening was carved into the side of a hill. Trees surrounded it, almost pointing towards it. A pool of water had collected in a small, naturally formed basin in front. Leaves swirled in the murky water. Caves always come with a bit of danger, especially at night. Illinois has no bear population. Only a handful of black bear sightings have ever been reported. But there are still bobcats, coyotes, and snakes to worry about. And with rain soon approaching, all animals, including man, would be looking for shelter. Frederick wasn't worried. In fact, he almost hoped an animal made its presence known. More meat to cook that way. He prepped the gun on his back. The itching was even louder, almost calling to him from the cave. Discovery, purpose, power. He walked in. The rain began the moment he entered the mouth of the cave. The drops pummeled the trees and ground in sheets of water. Oddly, the storm's noise was almost silent inside the cave. Frederick was able to hear his breathing. Every noise he made echoed across the stone walls. After several attempts, he started a fire. With dry wood he collected in his bag. He cooked his meal, proud of the day's work, and quickly fell asleep. The footsteps were quiet at first, indistinguishable from the sound of rain. They drew closer. Frederick slowly opened his eyes, scanning the cave. Nothing. Slowly, he sat up, clutching the gun in his hands. He could still hear the footsteps. 1, 2, 1, 2. The rhythm was human. Nerves clutching his heart, he called out. "Hello? Who's there?" No one answered. "I'm armed." Silence. Frederick stood. Obviously, someone had been hiking, like him, and set up camp farther down the tunnel. It was the logical idea, but why weren't they answering back? The itch told him to pursue. Frederick began walking deeper into the cave. The footsteps continued, almost in rhythm with his. The tunnel just continued to stretch on. The walls and ceiling were always wide enough to comfortably walk through. The stone was oddly smooth, as if carved by tools. An old mining tunnel, perhaps? It could be. Lead mines were everywhere. The cave was dark, but he had made a makeshift torch using his fire. Shadows danced on the walls from the torchlight, causing him to jump, thinking there was something in the corner of his eye. The footsteps continued, even and constant. Suddenly, the cave opened to an enormous chamber. Massive stalactites hung from the ceiling. From this perspective, the chamber had the distinct appearance of a mouth, filled with sharp teeth. The itch was almost clawing at his skin. It was close. He looked towards the end of the chamber. At the very end, a figure was kneeling by something, and torchlight danced around it. Numerous cave drawings and text were on the wall next to the figure. Drawings of all sorts of creatures and beings that the mind could barely comprehend. Words scrawled in sometimes neat and other times frantic script. The plan must move forward. Revenge, pain, they have all congregated. We will turn them. Must be reformed. The figure slowly rose, and Frederick realized something horrific. The figure was himself. The clothing, the torch, the body, all his. The itch continued. The figure slowly turned his face, which caused Frederick to step back in shock. The face was his. Even from the distance, it was unmistakable. It smiled and motioned to draw near. Frederick blinked, wanting to run, and the figure was gone. But not just the figure. The drawings, the writing on the wall, all gone. Frederick stood, shaking. He was dreaming. It was the only possible solution. At that moment, he heard a voice. It came from no specific direction. It seemed to fill the chamber and himself. It was in pain. Terrible pain. You will do nicely. You have a fire in you. Then, the voice's pain became his own. He fell to the ground, writhing in agony. The itching threatened to pierce through his skin from inside. Something was crawling inside of him, wriggling, finding a place to rest, a place to call home. Then, he found himself standing, the pain still radiating. He began to walk to the other side of the chamber. His limbs moved on their own. The pain was too much. He wasn't able to think clearly. Before he knew it, he had arrived at the other side, and he saw what his other self had been kneeling at. A small stone pedestal, crudely carved from a stalagmite. A leather book sat on top, the cover stained. A piece of metal was latching the book shut with a keyhole in the center. Frederick reached for the book. He had no key, but then he did. The key just appeared in his hand with a searing pain. It belonged to him. Of course he had the key. He opened the book. The book was blank except for a single sentence on the first page, written with an elegant hand. "Within these pages, you will write my words." The pen was in his hand the next moment, and Frederick's life passed into a dream. He wrote. That's all he did. He wrote while his body radiated with itching pain. The pain was always there, always crawling through his skin. Feverishly guided by something, he knew what to write. As he wrote, things became clear to him. He knew his place in all of this, understood why things happened the way they did. The mysteries of the earth opened up to him and greeted him. His master was his to follow. They walked hand in hand through pain and anguish. I write these things, not understanding what they mean, but trying to convey what Frederick wrote in his journals. From this point on, for several years, it seems the journals became manic, insane ramblings. Often the words are unintelligible, but a few things were clear. The pain was always there. Years of never-ceasing pain and agony as he wrote, and continued the work of whatever it was. Then there was the man. At first, he was only a thought in Frederick's head, an itching in his mind. As the writing continued, daily, the man became clearer and firmer, formed from the books, held together by them. Frederick, it would seem, did not need to eat. Whatever force compelled him to write seemed to sustain him, or maybe he was sustained by the words themselves. Maybe the words and the man are the same thing. A deep exhaustion washed over Frederick, but he was unable to stop. I'm not sure how long, but when he was done, the walls were filled with the drawing and writings he had seen so long ago, and there were several books in front of him. Frederick wrote that the words changed whenever you looked at them. The work wasn't done. Words, after all, are no good unless there are people to read them. The voice, the man, said their work was vital. People would sometimes enter the cave. The words, alive and thriving, would call to them. They called to each person individually. It knew their fears, their dreams, their desires. The man would give them a book. Sometimes Frederick would be allowed to leave the cave, to bring the books to places the voice could not. His body was not yet finished. Not yet real. Each time Frederick left the cave, the world was different. Whether it was the seasons, the people, or the cities growing rapidly around him, this wasn't his home anymore. His existence was the cave. He would deliver the books, so their power could fill the new spaces. Only specific people could read the words. He never figured out what the pattern was to which people could read them, and sometimes the voice would turn people away. Frederick did not know why. He did not need to know why. He was the scribe, nothing more. The books slowly left the cave, one by one. As the books left, the man began to fade. The words left, and as they left, the pain became less. The voices, the itch, slowly fading away. And one day, while Frederick sat in the cave. Body changed beyond all recognition. He left. It was as if waking from a dream. The man let him leave. There was no fight, no word. Perhaps he was too weak. The books were all gone, the power all drained. Had there ever been a man? Like a dream, the cave faded from his mind. It was late 1870. 5 years had passed. 5 long years asleep and in pain. But funny enough, the same spark of determination was alive in him. No one recognized him. No one really seemed to remember that he had been missing. He was a ghost among men, and he was determined to become real again. He worked hard, slowly amassing a fortune. People seemed to shrink before him now. There was a fire in his eyes. He married and had a kid in 1880, but then, as everyone does, he died. But not before the words made a return to his life. The books returned slowly at first. He did not know how or even why people were sending them to him. They returned for several reasons. The original owner dead, a donation to a worthy cause, a gift from his wife when she found it in the store and said it felt like him. The books were all together on his shelves. He never opened one. He didn't have to. He wrote them. And when they were all collected, the voice returned. Power filled the chamber of the building, changing the very corridors, morphing reality to their words. Slowly, imperceptibly, he locked them away. They had served their purpose, for now. They would spread again when the man deemed it time. The last sentence in his journals, the last record of a man losing his grip on reality, is not written in his hand. In red and elegant script, it says, "The words live on." I do not understand what I have written. I do not know whether to believe them. Frederick was a volatile, insane individual. A break from sanity would make sense with the life he led. But I can't help but feel that there is some truth to his tale. For on my deathbed, I've come to grips with that long ago, I hear the words whispering through the cracks of this house. Hear them whispering to me in the dark of the night, feel the itching in my mind. I hope these words find who they're supposed to. A new modern era. Times change, and so must the work, it would seem. Thank you for your time, Heartland Supernatural. The guy's insane. What do you mean, do I believe it, Felix? Of course I don't believe it. What? Okay, what happened to me in my past is not your concern. Okay, my life is private. It's mine. Got it? Yep. Michelle, what is it? Oh, the boss wants to talk. Nope, he never is happy. Well, I guess that's a wrap. Have a good night, everyone.
Well, I think we know what cave to look for. One of you start looking into the mapped caves and lead mines. If you find anything promising, I need to hear about it. This was a really early episode of the radio show. Felix was still new, and this was before Ariadne. I'm not a fan of how the radio show boss would try to stop specific episodes. Anyway, I think we know who wrote the book Sally found. No, we're not telling Denver about that yet. He has enough to remember. Keep searching through the show. There must be more. Let me know the moment Denver wakes up. What? We got a letter from Ariadne? Fantastic. No, don't open it. Denver needs to see it. Until then, I'm going to bed.
The Beating Heartland was written and performed by Denver Baughman. If you enjoyed the show, please rate and review us on whatever streaming platform you are using. follow us online at The Beating Heartland. Thank you for listening.